Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing Sansa 3, A Clash of Kings, or aka kind of like another Tyrion chapter. Sansa 3 is a weird one because the other two Sansa chapters feel like they are purely Sansa chapters, of course, and building up her character. Sansa 3 is a weird one because it not only is about her, of course, but this chapter predominantly also is kind of about Tyrion as well. Some of Tyrion's best lines in the entire book are in this chapter. So, kind of a weird hybrid chapter where it feels like George didn't want to give us another Tyrion chapter because we've had so many, so he did what kind of book one Sansa and Arya do for Ned. They kind of break up those POVs and implement a different POV into the same plotline. So I do really like Sansa 3, albeit it's a very short chapter. Probably the shortest script I've actually done for a reread in a good amount of weeks of doing these videos. But let's get into page 364 of Sansa 3, A Clash of Kings. Sandor Clegane warned Sansa not to keep Joffrey waiting. She hurried to dress, dreading the hound's look, and fearing Joffrey knew about Sir Dantos. Sansa doesn't know why Joffrey is upset with her, or why she needs to come to court and all of these things, but she knows it's usually not for a good reason. So she's going to try and dress really nicely to try and make him not punish her as badly or things like that. You're just going to see the psychological manipulation that's been done on Sansa here. Now, we as an audience also don't know exactly what's going on. Like, why is Sansa in trouble? Is it building off of Sansa 2 and her meeting Dantos trying to escape King's Landing? Has that already been figured out? Or is it something else? Now, we know it is something else. We know it is because Robb's campaign in the West, where he has done a massive, massive blow to the Lannister forces, as he's already dealt with those reserve forces that were coming from the West. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on as we get introduced to that in the story. She reassured herself that Joffrey liked her in that gown and tried to make herself look pretty. Sansa uses her, prettiness or her beauty as kind of a shield. It's what she tries to do, that if Sansa is looking more beautiful, Joffrey won't want to mess that up or something along those lines. She emerged and walked on the hound's unburned side, asking what she'd done wrong. But it's also interesting just looking at the hound, as both of his sides kind of represent Sansa in her struggle between kind of seeing the reality of things and what she still believes, right? Still believing in things like knights and all these fairy tales, while the other side of her is starting to realize more and more that that's not the case. That's not the world. Things like what happened with her father and how she's being treated. It's kind of in a lot of ways, Sansa is reflected in the character of the Hound, which is some of, I think, George's best writing. It's why a lot of people love the Hound, and I think people give Sansa a little bit too much grief and hate, but I think that this is just a nice subtle detail between the Hound and Sansa. The Hound said it wasn't her, but it was her brother, Robb. Sansa repeated her taught lines that Robb is a traitor, she had no part in it, and feared for her life if Jaime was harmed. Because Sansa is not oblivious at this point, she realizes if Jaime was to be killed, she would die, right? There's no point of holding Sansa anymore. There's no trade that would be available, and it'd also make the Lannisters look weak if they didn't kill Sansa if Jaime was actually killed. So in a lot of ways, hearing that this news is about Robb is not necessarily good for Sansa. Another interesting choice that George gives us is, you would think if we're going to learn about Robb's campaign, it was likely going to be through a character like Catelyn or a character like Bran, but no, it comes from Sansa. I think that's a nice, interesting touch because it definitely goes against what I think we would believe, right? Anytime we hear about stuff with Robb, it's usually from Catelyn or Bran because those are really the northern, plot lines at this point. In terms of the Northern Rebellion, I should say, not like Jon, for instance. And so we still don't know what Robb has done at this point of the story, but we're getting to that. The Hound mocked her training and led her to the lower bailey. As a crowd gathered near the archery butts, people moved aside, some avoiding her gaze, and we see a really horrifying sight. I actually didn't remember this being in the book, and it really struck me just reading this, telling about the brutality of really the Joffrey and the Lannister regime at this point, the things that are being done, as she saw a dying yellow cat with a crossbow bolt in its ribs and felt ill stepping around it. Just a horrible, horrible thing. And I mean, another thing to show is that We're not specifically told if Joffrey killed this cat, but it seems very likely given he has a crossbow and Sansa approaches, and also he has those tendencies that we've heard before of him brutalizing animals and things like that. It just really rubs me the wrong way, especially as I used to be cat owner. I really do like cats. That just rubs me the wrong way. Something I just didn't really remember in my rereads in the past. But that gets us to page 365. Another thing that's interesting is you look at the way people are looking at Sansa. They're avoiding her gaze and things like that because, in a lot of ways, Sansa is an undesirable. She is the daughter of a traitor. Robb is right now beating the Lannisters at every single point. I mean, the Lannisters have yet to really do any damaging blow to the Stark campaign. Robb has yet to have any of his big hiccups at this point. He hasn't married Jane Westerling. Theon has not invaded the North yet at this direct point. A lot of the mistakes that Robb makes haven't surfaced yet, so Robb's campaign is looking stronger and stronger. Sir Dantos approached on his broomstick horse, whispering to be brave, and squeezed Sansa's arm. The only one that's really even kind to Sansa just continues to build the psychological issues Sansa's going through, because even Dantos is also playing with her emotions and using her as well, but he's the only one treating her kindly. Joffrey stood at the center, winding a crossbow with Sir Boris and Sir Meryn nearby. This was the worst outcome for Sansa, as these were two of the more brutish ones, the ones that would treat her the worst. Sansa knelt before Joffrey, who told her kneeling wouldn't save her, and ordered her to stand. She pleaded innocence, but the Hound pulled to her feet. Not in the worst way, it seemed a bit delicate. The Hound is someone that is always described, at least with Sansa anyway, as being somebody that even though he is, really big, and he's a soldier, and he doesn't look the best, he is very kind of delicate with Sansa, showing that he does have a care for her. And what I think is interesting, the way that Sansa is being treated is so weird because obviously Sansa had nothing to do with Robb and the campaign going on there. She's a prisoner. And so Sansa's just in a horrible position. If she roots for Robb to win the war, she's punished more severely and would likely die. If she doesn't root for Robb to win the war, well, then her family is losing the war and could likely lose their lives. There is no really winning with Sansa at this point, outside of escaping King's Landing, something that she's banking all of her hope on Dantos, something we'll really see as the chapter goes on. Joffrey had Sir Lancel describe Robb's alleged crimes, an ambush near Lannisport using sorcery and wargs with northern men feasting on the slain. We're really not told here much of what actually occurred there, and Sansa will find that out more with Tyrion, but all you really need to know is that Robb has once again took a very unlikely path that nobody suspected and was able to have a surprise attack on the Westermen forces, mainly while they were sleeping and unawares, because Robb was outnumbered. Robb did not take his full army. You have to remember Robb's forces are still split. He has some of his forces were at River Run previously, then they head to the west. You have Roose Bolton, who is in charge of most of Robb's foot soldiers. So at this point, Robb being able to have victories over massive, hosts of Lannisters is quite insane. Now, I will say this, Robb, albeit has a great feat in this battle, a lot of these men were not the most trained. They were very much your extra reserve forces to try and make up for Jaime's lost force. Some of Jaime's old force, unfortunately, would be defeated a second time by Robb, so not a great look there for the Lannisters. Sansa was horrified and speechless as she knew what would happen to her. Sir Dantos tried to defend her, but Joffrey silenced him and pointed the crossbow at her. We obviously know Joffrey's not going to kill Sansa, but it's again threatening her, showing her what could happen. Joffrey called the Starks unnatural and reminded her that her wolf had bit him. Sansa right away corrects this because it wasn't Lady who actually bit Joffrey, it was Nymeria, Arya's direwolf. But Sansa continues saying that Joffrey forced Lady to be killed, which Joffrey refutes, which is hilarious because Joffrey and Cersei were the ones that had Lady killed. Yes, Ned did the deed, but Ned did it in a way that was respectful to Lady the best way you possibly could. And that was what happened. Not that Ned chose to kill Lady, it was forced by Joffrey and Cersei. Joffrey kind of brushes this off and even kind of taunts her even more, showing off how he killed a man during the night when he shot a man through the throat and injuring a woman during a riot the night before. Joffrey lowered the crossbow, saying he'd shoot her too if not for Jaime's safety, and ordered the Hound to hit her instead. something that the Hound will not do. The Hound does not blindly follow Joffrey's orders, especially pertaining to things like Sansa. And you see right away what Joffrey's just doing to Sansa, just making her fear him more, and just psychologically and physically abusing her at this point. As we get into page 366, Sir Dantos tried to save the day, offering to beat Sansa using a melon-topped broomstick as a mock weapon, trying to spare her any of this physical pain. But Joffrey was in no mood today. Everyone else was kind of around her, laughing, while Dantos was shouting traitor and lightly hitting her. But Joffrey was as cold as ever. He ordered Sir Meryn to remove Dantos, who was thrown aside. Sir Boros seized Sansa. Joffrey told him to leave her face alone, as he liked her pretty. Just a weird thing to say. This is the person that you're betrothed to. This is someone completely innocent in whatever crimes that he believes Robb is committing at this point. And then he has the audacity to say he likes her face, just beat her everywhere else. Boy, it's not hard to hate Joffrey. Boris, then a full-grown man, I might add, in, male armor and all that kind of stuff, punches her full on in the stomach, then beat her legs with the flat of his sword. Remember, Sansa is a very young girl. She's described as maybe not being like extremely thin, but she is somebody that is like slim for the most part. This is something that is going to leave massive bruises. These are pains that are not going to go away easily. It is just crazy what's happening to Sansa. Sansa screamed and cried, losing count of the blows, until the Hound rasped, "Enough." The Hound is the only person outside of Dantos that steps up for Sansa. And the Hound does it in a way that isn't trying to, manipulate her or any of those things. The Hound genuinely cares about Sansa's well-being, whereas someone like Dantos does not. Dantos is somebody trying to gain Sansa's trust. The Hound, the person that Sansa can't even look at, the person that's not even a knight, is the only one stepping up for her. It's even more interesting as we get into the next person that steps up for Sansa. Joffrey refused to stop, though, and ordered Boris to strip her. Boris tore her bodice, exposing her chest as she covered herself, while the crowd laughed cruelly. This is what's even more crazy, is you look at these people that are in the court, and they're laughing at this. They're laughing at Sansa being tortured and publicly shamed, all of these things. And it makes you kind of understand why somebody like maybe Joffrey or somebody like maybe Maegor would see this as a reward for punishing people and being cruel. Now, I think it's way different with Maegor, but I think some of the same ideas still apply. Like, Maegor was somebody that was rewarded for violence from his mother. Joffrey is kind of the same way, except it's violence being done upon people that isn't even him, like he's ordering people to do so. This is basically just telling Joffrey, yeah, the people like when I do this kind of stuff, and it makes me feel good, so I should. That's the stuff that Cersei should be here to tell him no, and all this other stuff, but Cersei's not the best mother when it comes to Joffrey, especially. Joffrey demanded more beating to send a message to Robb. When at this, we have our second interruption of Joffrey. This time, Tyrion Lannister interrupts, shouting, "What is the meaning of this?" This scene, by the way, in Game of Thrones in Season 2 is perfectly put to screen, by the way. I just wanted to throw that out there. I do like to give the show its flowers when it takes some of the scenes from the book and perfectly adapts them to the screen. I think this is one of those moments. But before we get into Tyrion and Joffrey's whole scuttle and all that stuff, I do want to point out, think about the two people that come to Sansa's aid. And these two people don't necessarily have any manipulation they're trying to do on Sansa as a whole. Tyrion might have some other motives that we'll talk about when we get to Tyrion and Sansa, but Tyrion is just trying to defend Sansa because she is innocent. But think about that. It's not the gallant knights. It's not the, people that Sansa views as being the good people. It's the people that don't fit in. It's Tyrion with his misshaped body and his mismatching eyes and all of that comes to her rescue. And it also does kind of foreshadow that Tyrion and Sansa will marry at some point as well, and how that dynamic might be. But it is interesting to think about from Sansa. If you think about all the people trying to help her, it's the people that don't necessarily fit in, or Sansa doesn't view as being the best people ever, right? Because they don't look, really handsome or whatnot. Sansa fell to her knees, covering herself and gasping. Tyrion condemned Sir Boros for beating a helpless girl. Again, he's a knight of the Kingsguard, and this is happening directly in the throne room. Boris and Meryn readied their swords in defiance as Tyrion's sellsword warned them against getting blood on their white cloaks. A classic line from Bronn. Yeah, there's just some great lines here, and really this whole conversation is iconic on every single quote you could do. Tyrion then ordered someone to give Sansa clothing to cover herself. As we get into page 367, of course the person to give up their cloak for Sansa is the Hound. Again, it builds a lot of that relationship. The person Sansa is the most afraid of, we even started this chapter with her not even being able to, look at his face, is the one that's constantly seeming to protect her. I just really think that that is really well written, especially in this chapter specifically. Also goes to paint Sandor's kind of distaste for being a knight and things like that. He is a Knight of the Kingsguard. That's the title. And here he is instantly giving away this white cloak of his, also foreshadowing him leaving Joffrey's service. Tyrion then told Joffrey that Sansa was to be his queen and asked if he had no regard for her honor. As Joffrey insisted, he was punishing her for having the blood of a wolf. Just because somebody's a Stark means they have to be punished for things they're not even really associated with. Joffrey is just an ass. Tyrion mocked his reasoning, comparing him to Aerys Targaryen. As Aerys Targaryen did whatever he likes, Joffrey is acting in the same manner, and warning what happened to kings who did as they liked, which is completely true. One of the things about being a king is you should put the needs of the people before your own, and so many times we see that not to be the case, whether that's Aegon IV, whether that's Joffrey, whether that's Aerys. These kings don't necessarily last the longest, and they don't have the best outcomes. Sir Boris took this as a threat, but Tyrion clarified he was educating, not threatening, his nephew, then directly threatened Boris if he interrupted again. We get that iconic line from the show, if he speaks again, kill him. This is what makes Tyrion, in my opinion, so great, is that not only in his own chapters is he fantastic, he completely takes over this chapter. This is a Sansa chapter, and we don't hear a lot of Sansa's thoughts when you're reading the book at this section of it, of course, because she's not the main focus. It's Tyrion, but Tyrion's just presence. He's able to come into the throne room, put the king in his place. It just shows you how much power Tyrion has currently at King's Landing. He's also doing the role of what his father, Jaime, or Robert should have been doing, Cersei should have been doing. Nobody ever tells Joffrey no, and that's what's allowed Joffrey to become, unfortunately, the person that he is. Sir Boros turned red and warned the queen would hear of this, as Tyrion encouraged Joffrey to summon his mother if he dared. At this, Joffrey went quiet. Tyrion advised him that fear would not win him love or loyalty, as Joffrey replied that his mother said fear was better and claimed Sansa feared him as well. Now, this is an interesting point, because when we get further into the book series, Tyrion will flip on this quite a lot. Tyrion, by the time we get to book 5, is a broken down man. He's almost given up on love and people loving him in return, that he goes into this idea of fear as well. So it's interesting that when we look at Tyrion in A Clash of Kings, he still is holding on for the ability of people to like him and to be loved as a Hand of the King or whatnot. He's trying to defend people like Sansa, who really are not going to thank him all that much for it. He's trying to have a relationship with Shay. We see how that's going to go down. So I think a lot of this is so interesting because in a lot of ways, Tyrion is going to flip on this thought process as the story goes on. And as we know, the best way to rule is to have somewhere be in the middle, right? To be loved, but to also be feared, and to use those when you need to. Tyrion sighed sarcastically, wishing Stannis and Renly were young girls. Obviously, Joffrey cannot make Stannis afraid of him, which is just obvious, and Sansa is a prisoner. She's defenseless. She can't do anything about what Joffrey's doing to her, so of course she's going to fear him. He ordered Bronn and Timett to take Sansa away. Sansa, still dazed and shocked by what just happened, expected to return to Maegor's Holdfast, but was instead brought to the Tower of the Hand. A very traumatic place to be brought back to when we think about the events of Book 1, where everybody she knew would have been slaughtered or killed. It's going to remind her of more awful memories. Really, everywhere within King's Landing, she's going to think of these memories, and it's going to be kind of a Harrenhal for her. The location triggered memories of her father's downfall, making her feel faint. Serving girls cared for her, stripping her ruined gown and bathing her, and as they washed her, all she could see were the mocking faces from the Bailey. All Sansa has ever been taught is how to be a proper lady, and Joffrey has stripped that from her, quite literally and also figuratively. Sansa has lost kind of the respect, and really, she's being laughed at by everyone. She's not loved or any of those things. Everything the stories have told her have gone awry. And I think it's really interesting because you can kind of compare Sansa and Cersei in a way. Like Cersei, when she has her Walk of Atonement, it's a similar, it's a similar thing, even though I think Cersei's is much more traumatic, of course, but it's a similar kind of idea, right? Cersei, Sansa both being stripped of their decency, right? So I think that's a nice little kind of comparison between the two, albeit very different scenarios. And Sansa's defenseless, Cersei puts herself in that position. But you get the point I'm trying to make. As we get into page 368, Sansa reflected bitterly that knights are sworn to protect the weak, but none had helped her, only Sir Dantos, who was no longer even a true knight at all. Again, the people that do show her kindness, they're not knights. You look at Dantos, again, there's reasoning to why he's doing it, but still, for Sansa, why is Dantos, the Hound, and Tyrion, the people being nice to her, when those in her mind are the last people that should be nice to her? Those aren't the good-looking knights of the fairy tales and all of that. At this point, Maester Franken arrived, applied salve to the welts on her legs, and gave her honey dream wine to help her sleep. Sansa thought the Maester was foolish for thinking that everything that happened today would feel like a dream later, but drank it anyway. Now, we know the Maester is just trying to be kind to Sansa, right? Trying to make her feel better. He knows what's truly going to happen. So this is right here, I think, a lot of the monologue of the stuff we see in Sansa's head into why a lot of people dislike Sansa as much as they do. We see a lot of this, especially in book 1 and book 2. And again, I want to put this into context. Sansa's alone. She's afraid. She's been humiliated, physically abused. She can't trust anyone. I mean, she's been put into an awful position, and you would probably be a bit, cranky as well. And it's not like she's saying these things to him. She's just thinking them. She awoke in darkness and in pain, confused, until she remembered everything. A robe had been left for her when she tried to leave. A stern woman with leathery skin and a necklace of human ears blocked her. The woman said Tyrion had ordered Sansa not to leave and told her to pray where she was. Again, it's going to feel like Sansa's a prisoner. She can't leave, even though Sansa's being treated better at any point than she's been with Cersei and Joffrey. It still feels like a prison cell. It feels like maybe Arianne in book 4 when she's basically a prisoner, but she's living kind of nicely. Sansa retreated then and realized she'd been placed in Arya's old room from when their father was Hand. Yes, it was different, right? All the furniture that had been in there before was gone, but it still felt the same. A servant brought food and water, and Sansa at first refused, but eventually drank and nibbled an olive. And at this point, Tyrion, most likely being alerted of her, stirring and things, knocked on the door. She straightened up anxiously. What was this going to be? Was she going to be, harmed even further? Was she to be a prisoner of Tyrion now? What was to come of her? What was to happen with her? Tyrion entered, politely asking if he was disturbing her. And Sansa right away gets to the point. Was she a prisoner now, or what was going on here? Tyrion replied she was his guest. Now, we know that to be true. From Tyrion's point of view, Tyrion is probably trying to protect Sansa from Joffrey and all the things being done to her. Now, in the back of his mind, he also might be thinking, I now control Sansa. How could I maybe use her as a brokering chip or one of these things to maybe get Jaime back or anything like that? I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think it's more Tyrion is trying to preserve her, because if she was to kill herself, if she was to die, because one of these beatings goes too far, Jaime will die. And I think Tyrion recognizes that. So I think Tyrion is a lot more genuine than someone like Dantos, but I think Tyrion still does have some ulterior motives with Sansa here as well. And Sansa is right to be suspicious of Tyrion, not because of Tyrion's appearance, but because of how she's been treated by the Lannisters. She is very distrustful at this point, and you can't blame her for being so. Wearing his hand's chain, he said he just wanted to talk. Sansa replied formally, trying not to stare at his grotesque face, which strangely fascinated her. See, unlike the Hound, she could look at Tyrion very easily, but it was not because of him being handsome or any of those things, because it was just so ugly to Sansa. It was so uniquely distasteful that it just kind of caught her eye. And Tyrion is somebody that's going to pick up on that right away. But again, it just shows you kind of why people don't like Sansa. I mean, Sansa bringing this up, and I can't necessarily blame Sansa. Everybody thinks this of Tyrion, not just Sansa. It's just because we're in Sansa's head. As we get into page 369, Tyrion politely asked if Sansa was comfortable and if she needed anything else. She thanked him for helping her that morning as Tyrion explained Joffrey's rage. This is where we actually get the true story of what happened, but Robb Stark had ambushed and crushed Sir Stafford Lannister's host at Ox Cross, and this is a huge victory for the Starks. Does it mean they're going to have victory over the Lannisters? No, but what this is doing is it gives Robb more freedom to act. He can take the fight to the Westerlands now, and that's going to be a really big point because it's going to keep Tywin's attention in the West and the current state of the Riverlands more than it's going to be on the Crown and what's happening down south. Sansa internally celebrated Robb's victory, but outwardly called him a traitor, repeating her lines. Tyrion mocked Sir Lancelot's claim of war, clarifying that Robb only used his direwolf and tactics like cutting horse lines to cause chaos. It's a lot of Robb thinking outside of the box, doing things that really are not traditional war like tactics. He's doing things that give him an advantage when he doesn't really have the advantage in most of the situations in terms of just straight up numbers. Robb's forces killed several Lannister men and captured many others, spreading fear and tales of northern magic. Of course, people have to come up with some reason as to why Robb is now beating the Lannisters more and more, even though it is really just up to incompetence. As Tyrion dismisses that, saying it was Sir Stafford's incompetence and poor preparation, there were not even sentries. Right? Robb basically walked up to their camp. Nobody stopped him, and he just did this. Now, again, if you are Sir Stafford, how are you supposed to predict an attack by Robb in a place where he shouldn't even be able to get to, right? It's tough. I think it's Sir Stafford being a little too overconfident and not, just having some sentries just in case. But it just comes down to Robb and the Blackfish is just excellent strategy. He notes that Robb remains a major threat and Joffrey a personal burden. Tyrion asks Sansa how he truly felt about Joffrey. Tyrion is trying to see what Sansa will say and what he can do about Sansa's situation. Sansa lied smoothly, claiming to love Joffrey deeply, and Tyrion doesn't buy it. Albeit Tyrion says that her ability to lie is convincing, he sees right through it. He then asked her if she had been menstruating, suggesting maybe political or marital implications ahead if Tyrion was going to use her in some way. As we get into page 370, Sansa's a bit taken aback by this. She blushes at this, which I don't blame her. It's a very awkward question. But Sansa, thinking about her earlier public humiliation, this is nothing, right? She's been far worse treated than this. She has been far more humiliated than this, and so the question barely phases her in that regard. As Sansa says she has not. Tyrion says it was for the best, and confided that he didn't plan for her to marry Joffrey. And again, this was just a pointless match at this point. Sansa is a good match if somebody like Robb is taken out, all these people are gone. At this moment, Sansa is kind of a whatever person to marry at this point, because you gotta remember, you have Robb in front of her, you have Bran in front of her, you have Rickon in front of her. Right now, there are 3 people in front of her. And remember, Bran and Rickon are at Winterfell, safe and sound. Nobody believes anything bad's going to happen to them. So Sansa, as of right now, Sansa is not a good marriage candidate for a Lannister because, well, the Lannisters and Starks are at war. The Starks obviously won't the Starks and Lannister relationship won't be fixed by Sansa marrying someone. So as of right now, Sansa is kind of a useless tool outside of being a bargaining chip for Jaime. That's why Tyrion is saying to her, when the war is over, if the Starks bend the knee, I plan to send you home, or one of those type of things. Now, would that go through? Would Tywin keep her as a hostage? Think very likely. Sansa stayed silent, uncertain whether honesty would be punished, and said only that she wanted to be loyal. Sansa says the only thing that she thinks she can say. If she says the wrong thing, what will Tyrion do to her? Tyrion emphasized, recalling how he too once wished to be far from the Lannisters, again seeing through her lie. He asked what she's prayed for in the Godswood, and this gets a little bit too close to Sansa's actual purpose. She's trying to escape with Sir Dantos. Sansa, in her mind, wished for Robb's victory, Joffrey's death, and a return home, but answered vaguely, an end to the fighting. Another safe answer, because that is what she wants, but who wins? It's kind of up for debate. Tyrion said peace would come after one more decisive battle between Tywin and Robb. And that seems to be the case at this point. At least for the Lannister-Stark conflict, it didn't matter that Robb was winning these victories if he could not beat Tywin. If you can't beat Tywin, none of this matters. But if you're looking at it from Tyrion's point of view, the big question is, how is Tyrion going to deal with either Stannis or Renly? He warned her not to overestimate Robb's success, implying that Tywin was a far greater opponent than Stafford Lannister, which is 100% correct. Tyrion expressed hope that Robb would bend the knee so he could send Sansa home. But at this point, Robb is in a winning position. Surrender does not look like it is going to be coming anytime soon. He offered her a room in the Tower of the Hand with stone crows as guards, and Sansa begins to panic, because if she was now in the Tower of the Hand, how is she going to get to the Godswood? This would prevent her from seeing Ser Dantos and possibly escaping, even though we know that really for the best interest of Sansa at this point, staying with Tyrion would provide her much more security, much more benefits, and being treated well, but she refuses because she's still holding on to this hope that Dantos can get her away from here. And so she refuses. Tyrion suggested Shella, a woman wildling, instead, as maybe a woman would comfort Sansa, but no. Sansa, still terrified, declined again. Tyrion explained the wildling's presence would protect her from Joffrey and the cruel Kingsguard, like we saw in the throne room. But again, for Sansa, it's not about that, like we've just talked about, and you can kind of see Tyrion trying to figure it out. Why doesn't Sansa want to stay under his protection? As we get into page 371, Sansa lies about the Tower of the Hand, claiming the ghosts of her father's men would haunt her there, causing nightmares and visions of blood, which I think is still partly true. Even though this is a lie by Sansa, I think subconsciously Sansa is still also kind of freaked out about having to live back where she was before with, her father and Arya and all that happened there, but it is still a lie. And Tyrion seems to read this on her face once again, but he doesn't comfort her about it, right? He's not going to force her to live here. If she doesn't want to live here, so be it. Tyrion tried, he put his best foot forward, but Sansa doesn't want to live here, and that possibly is going to allow for her to be abused more. He acknowledges his own experience with nightmares and responds empathetically, offering to escort her back to her chambers. And that is the end of the chapter. So yeah, pretty short chapter with Sansa 3, albeit I think this is her best chapter. Now, it isn't necessarily because of Sansa herself, albeit I think that her actual inner thoughts are fascinating here. Her having to deal with trauma and abuse and that mistrust and all of those things. And I think the way George writes the characters of the Hound and Tyrion in this chapter really helped beat, I think, her best chapter. I think it's a lot of those side characters that really help Sansa's arc early on, because Sansa is a character that's trapped. She's in a lot of ways like Bran, but in a different way, right? Whereas Sansa's setting, where she's at, her plot is much more interesting than Bran's. They're two trapped characters, right? They're the very polar opposite of, say, Arya earlier in this book, where Arya had kind of her freedom to try and get north. They're trapped. They're trapped in King's Landing, or they're trapped in Winterfell. It makes for an interesting read. But thank you guys all for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one, which we'll get back up with Catelyn's arc, as we'll get into Catelyn 4 and the unfortunate death of Renly Baratheon. But bye, guys.